Yeah, with the permission of your hearts and your souls, I would like to share with you some learnings that I've been gathering, not only like in my academic formation, but also in like the experiences of my territory. And yeah, I want to talk about how the food of the future is rooted in ancestral traditions because Mesoamerican plant based food traditions can become climate solutions. And I would like to start sharing a story about how I grew up listening to the stories about the plants that grow in the tropical desert of Puebla, Mexico, which is the land where the generation and my family and my community have lived for centuries. And it is home of a variety of indigenous communities, the Nahuas, the Mixtecas, and the Inguiwas, where I descend from. And my grandfather says that when he was a child, all that they ate were greens from the hills, were seeds from the crops. That growing up, he used to think that they were very poor for eating just that, since wealthy people in the city used to eat meat every day. But it is now that being strong and healthy at his 91 years of life, he has realized that what they ate was the best that they could ever eat. The experience of my grandfather was, and what he was influenced to believe, is not only exclusive to our community or to our cultural region, but it is something that is shared across Mesoamerica. And there are even records of chronicles where these, on their violation narratives of indigenous food systems, were being imposed during the colonization of Latin America. In the New Granada, specifically, that is today known as Colombia, indigenous peoples were told by the colonizers that the food that they used to eat was non nutritious, non sustaining, worthless, inappropriate, and even disgusting. This was part of a broader Western intention to colonize not only our lands, but also our minds and our bodies. Food was one of the mechanisms used to force colonization alongside religion and politics. This colonial intention, rooted in the ignorance of the nutrients, the symbolism, and the knowledge behind the consumption of fruit, wheat, and insects, is, however, a historical testament of how food systems are vital for the recreation and transmission of a worldview, a system change, and a cultural behavior. Even Vandana Shiva has stated it already that those who control food can control life on Earth. And scientists now also say that the milpa is the base of Mesoamerican civilizations, and that is not only a crop, but it's a way of life. Um, because it is through food that we conceive the world, that we share knowledge, that we reproduce life. And as our elders tell stories, pass on recipes, teach gathering and sewing traditions, indigenous peoples, we are the guardians of this vital knowledge that relies on the ecological diversity, the complementarities, the reciprocity, and the symbiosis between the plant species that compose these ancestral food systems that also Tanya talked about. From our oral tradition, from the stories of the elders, but also from archaeological science, we know that in Mesoamerica, the plant-rich diet was the one that gave health to our communities and to our territories. Plant-based diets have been at the core of indigenous Mesoamerican civilizations for over 10,600 years. Since pre-ceramic times, before like the ceramic that we now know, tradition of health and nutrition were centered on these seeds, on these roots and weeds and mushrooms that are the major components of the traditional diet. More than 20 years ago, scientists, NGOs have acknowledged that food production systems will be more sustainable by reducing the consumption of meat and dairy products, including more vegetable species in overall diets. But in our communities, we have known and lived in a mainly plant-based diet centuries ago. In the Mesoamerican regions, the main dishes were made out of gathered leaves, flowers, roots, mushrooms, wheat. And these are some of the flowers, the roots that we eat in my community. The techas, which is a flower that grows in a cactus, and nopales, which is a cactus itself, and tempesquisles, that are fruits of the desert, of an ecosystem that people would often think that does not have life, but actually is one of the most biodiverse places in Mexico. It's just a different biodiversity. And these species have also been domesticated to be included in traditional crops. And these nutritious plants have been made into a variety of dishes, soups, and drinks for generations that are for everyday life, but also for ceremonies. Mexico is home to this pre-Hispanic Mesoamerican world that we know a lot of, that we envision and that we respect, but is also currently displaying one of the highest mortality rates due to diabetes, due to the active promotion of Western diets that are mainly based on meat and highly processed foods, like has been said on the previous presentations as well. And these processed foods require larger agricultural areas, require great quantities of pesticides, and produces large amounts of greenhouse gases. The expansion of industrial animal agriculture is displacing our traditional food and our ancestral relations to the territory that has sustained us for generations. Even is stated now that meat production even accounts for more fossil fuel use than plant. And historically, meat consumption was only a marginal complement of the diet, was never the core, and it was reserved for times for ritual celebrations. And it is only that after Western colonization that food systems were transformed to serve Spanish commercial systems, neglecting indigenous food tradition and identities. They sought to legitimize the colonizer civilized food, meat and bread as well, how has been said, given that the different and unknown soil conditions. It was only through large-scale livestock production that they were able to sustain their dominant way of life, where the fundament was animal agriculture as a superior practice that allowed the domination and transformation of this wild land that was not productively used. And after 1940, this conception of the necessity to transform this non-productive land originated into a major land use change process led by the state that converted natural areas to animal agriculture farms that now occupy 60% of the Mexican national territory, being one of the major drivers of land degradation, ecosystem deforestation, loss of biodiversity, and water scarcity. Globally, animal agriculture is a leading cause of climate breakdown, responsible for around 16% of global greenhouse gas emissions. This is like a map of the territory where I come from, of the region of Tehuacan, and it shows where all the factory farms are located, considering that now globally most of the farms are factory farms, and in Latin America, factory farming is the single largest driver of land conversion. And this is already being experienced by my community, the Inguigual land in the Tehuacan region, where factory farming agribusiness is taking our ancestral land, an already fragile ecosystem, to create profit out of animal exploitation, indigenous rights violation, and water stress. Of the conflict cases in the region registered by the Environmental Justice Atlas, all of the conflicts are related to factory farming and the poultry industry technologies that farmers say that they use technologies to disseminate rainwater and dry up the groundwater. This issue is an issue of indigenous people's rights as well. Because as community feminists have reminded us, land, body, and territory are intersected. The effects of an extractive industry are felt across all our battlefronts. And this is not only theory, it is a response to a lived experience and to an ancestral teaching that has been embedded in quotidianity, in spirituality, and in these conflicts. This relation to the land of that indigenous communities are facing due to the expansion of agribusiness is a threat. According to the 2022 Global Witness Report, a part of Latin America being the most dangerous region in the world to be a human rights defender, the industry that is directly linked with the most human rights violations and lethal attacks toward environmental defenders is the agribusiness. More than a third of these lethal attacks being towards indigenous peoples. Then factory farming is not only a threat to the environment, but a danger to the people defending water, forest, and life itself. In the Ingiwa community of Puebla, where I'm from, the youth and the elders are being openly against the expansion of poultry industries and factory farming, like bachoco, like all these, even the monocultures of El Cuervo are at risk because they are not able to show openly, and they have to do different types of protests that are hiding their faces and preserving their security. Since the very first introduction of livestock through colonization, to the colonial tendencies of big agriculture promoting Western meat-based diets consumption at the sake of human and planetary health, indigenous people are resisting this extractivist industrial agriculture system and their impact on both the loss of biodiversity and the loss of the traditions of ancestral diet. But this knowledge on the ecosystems and these traditions that have been passed on to us over the years are the ones sustaining not only the nature around us, but also the life that we have been taught by our ancestors. And it is something that is also has to do with how climate solutions work, because between 2018 and 2021, the Inter-American Development Bank invested around $500 million in factory farming operations across Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is not only putting forward a system using public money that is not feeding the people, but corporations. And every dollar spent on factory farming harms communities like mine. And far from supporting global sustainability and development goals, the banks are putting them further out of reach and propping up this failing system. Then the climate action movement has a duty to decolonization in the way solutions are proposed and implemented. And only by making a shift within food systems that learns from the ancestral plant-based food traditions, like the Mesoamerican one, only by funding climate solutions like the traditional methods and knowledge systems safeguarded by indigenous peoples, is that global ambition can increase food security, food sovereignty, strengthen sustainable livelihoods, and preserve the ecosystems, and finally create an alternative to the factory farming industry that is harming the world and creating climate change. So I would like to start propping up a question to take our homes and take to our everyday life, and beginning to question, mostly if you come from a rich nation, if societies, given our economic conditions now and our ecological context, if it still makes sense to follow a diet and a mindset that has historically exploited our labor and our land, and if it makes sense to fund the production systems that are putting at risk the preservation of all forms of life, and if we want to then learn from the knowledge of our ancestors, that is not only something that we can remember on rituals, but something that we can do on everyday life.